pressure even more so on Benjamin Netanyahu and his top lieutenants in the government to sign some kind of deal, seal the deal, one of the chants that we were hearing in these protests. We saw what looked more like a symbolic effort. You know, we were still seeing traffic circulating, work was going on. We saw that, you know, the main international airport in Tel Aviv, Ben Gurion, it was still more or less operating, even though it was supposed to halt for a few hours. And there was a judge that ordered that that the strike had to stop at 2:30 p.m. local time this afternoon because there wasn't enough time notice. But this was still a highly effective, resonant protest, and the strike really did leave an impact. And it is yet to be seen whether or not we're going to be hearing more from the government. But we did see, as you mentioned, that funeral in Jerusalem today for Hersh Goldberg Polin. He is one of the most high profile of those hostages, certainly one of the most high profile of the Americans because of his parents' outspoken activism. We even saw them speaking at the Democratic National Convention just last week. And we heard from his father, who, while we did hear, you know, this incredibly gut-wrenching, emotional pleas and eulogies about this young man, Hersh, we also heard a bit of politics. Here's John himself speaking about his son.
For 330 days, Mama and I sought the proverbial stone that we could turn over to save you. Maybe, just maybe, your death is the stone, the fuel that will bring home the remaining 101 hostages.
Now, in a way, the parents have already gotten their wish, because when we were out there last night for hours and hours, yes, everybody was very angry with Hamas, the terrorist group that they are accusing of having killed these young people, all of them under the age of 40, or at least under the age of 40. They were also extremely angry at Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, who they say has deliberately delayed a deal that would free those remaining hostages. And that's one of the reasons why we saw those protests and why we saw them continuing into today. This is grief, but it is very, very political. Alex.
And listen, we were covering this over the weekend, particularly yesterday with you, Matt, and with regard to anger. It was spilling out into the streets. We were with you for hours in that one contained area where there were thousands upon thousands. But when it went into the streets, we saw a lot of interaction, arrests, people, demonstrators being dragged away by police. Any of that kind of activity between the two today, demonstrators and police?
I haven't heard that much of that. We could see more this evening when night falls. That's, you know, when we start to see this kind of thing happening. You know, I have to tell you, this isn't all that rare for the protests, even by these family members of the hostages and their supporters. These have often turned violent over the last nearly a year since the October 7th attacks. So, you know, it really does show kind of a catharsis, a venting of frustration into violence. And even though, like I said, all of this is just shrouded in grief and despair, it is so very political and so much about the government, opposition to the government. And I have to tell you, a lot of this started even before those October 7th attacks. You know, this has really only cleaved open a lot of the fissures that were there even before October 7th, a lot of the protests that were happening last summer in opposition to Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, and his judicial reforms. We're seeing a lot of the same faces, a lot of the same expressions of anger. This is a similar sort of political group, and it really falls along some of the same lines that are familiar culture wars here in Israel. Alex? All
right, Matt Bradley, thank you so much for that reporting. Let's get to you, Colonel Jacobs. Netanyahu has certainly stood firm. He said Sunday that the killings of the 6 hostages proves Hamas doesn't want a deal. That said, do you get a sense the public protests are going to force his hand to make one?
It may very well be the case. I mean, we've heard, it's worth repeating that dissatisfaction with Netanyahu and his policies predates this incident, predates even October 7th. And one of the principal reasons that Netanyahu is still in office in the first place is because of his support from far-right parties, dozens of political parties in Israel. One Israel, but lots of political parties. But he's propped up by the far right, who insists on the destruction of Hamas. Remember that right after October 7th, Netanyahu said that the objective was the complete destruction of Hamas, an extremely difficult, labor-intensive, and time-intensive task, even if it were possible, and it would include Israeli occupation, long-term occupation of Gaza. Israel's tried that before and didn't like it, and it didn't work. And so increasing dissatisfaction that's coalesced around the loss of these hostages, Alex.
Colonel, let me play a part of what the father of another hostage told our colleague, José Díaz-Balart, earlier today about Netanyahu's role in all of this. Here it is.
The Israeli government, with Netanyahu at its head, has been prioritizing this fantasy of total victory over Hamas and selling it to their own base in Israel. This is not about national security. Everyone in Israel, almost everyone in Israel, understands that. This is about the fulfillment of a political agenda and the retention of political power by Netanyahu's far-right coalition.
Because I guess the question has to be raised, Colonel, can the ideology behind Hamas ever be fully eradicated? So my question to you is, do you agree, first of all, with what that father said? And what is driving Netanyahu's strategy right now?
Well, one should never say never or always, because it's never the case, to put it into a phrase. Destroying Hamas, or indeed any of the proxies fueled by Iran's desire to destroy Israel and take control of the entire region, is extremely difficult, if not impossible. So the objective of complete destruction of Hamas probably is not going to happen anytime soon, and it's certainly not going to happen under the aegis of a Netanyahu government. But it's extremely difficult also to get a government together in Israel that can agree on anything that's anything more tactical than the strategic objective of saving Israel's security. Israel lives in a very, very difficult and dangerous neighborhood. Even the elimination of Hamas is not going to make Israel safe. Don't forget that we've got in the north Hezbollah, who's an extremely powerful organization fueled by, supplied by, advised by, armed by Iran. That region is extremely difficult. Even if you were to eliminate Hamas, it would not guarantee Israel's safety in the region, Alex.
So, Monica, I know we heard from the president on all of this not too long ago. What did he say?
Yeah, he was returning from a weekend in Delaware, Alex, and he did speak to a lot of these very pressing questions about where this goes from here and whether there's any reality check on a potential deal or whether these deaths, these tragic losses of life of these hostages over the weekend further complicate that, or is it something that ignites this final momentum and push that has been needed to close the gaps in these last stages, which for months the Biden administration has said they're very close, that they are really just nearing this completion of an agreement. And then at the end, there's always something that delays it. But here's a little bit more of what the president had to say about the status of those talks and whether he believes Prime Minister Netanyahu is doing enough.
Final hostage deal for the both sides this week.
We're very close to that.
What makes you think that this deal will be successful in a way that the other deals were not?
Hope springs eternal.
Mr. President, do you think it's time for Prime Minister Netanyahu to do more on this issue? Do you think he's doing enough?
No.
Mr. President, what is your reaction to the demonstrations across Israel? What is your reaction to the demonstrations?
I'm going to get the detail when I walk in, and I'll talk to you after that, okay?
Thank you. Last best chance for a deal, Mr. President. Do you have a message for the hostages' family, sir?
Yes, I've spoken to the American hostage. I spoke to his mom and dad, and we're not giving up.
Both President Biden and Vice President Harris spoke with the Hirschberg Polans yesterday. We know that National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan spoke virtually with some of the other American hostage families who are also just so desperate for information about their loved ones. And I'm told, Alex, that the administration has really been in very close touch with the key negotiating partners in Israel, in Egypt, in Qatar, and they're hopeful that something can come together. But that is how the president put it just moments ago. Hope springs eternal. That has been his position. He's tried to be optimistic on all of this, but in reality, this diplomatic agreement and deal for a ceasefire and release of the remaining hostages has been incredibly difficult and incredibly elusive and plagued by politics.
Indeed. Colonel, he also said we're not giving up, which brings me to this, because the president said he is working on a, quote, final hostage deal. The Washington Post reports that if this deal doesn't work, the U.S. could walk away from negotiations. Is that a real possibility? Do you think the prospect of that would force everyone to the table?
Well, I don't think it's going to force either party to come to a deal. Just the prospect of the United States walking away from being involved in negotiations. The crux of the problem, I mean, there are lots of disagreements here, but one of them, the principal one, revolves around the Israeli insistence that it be able to control the border with the Gazan border with Egypt to make sure that Iran doesn't continue to ship people, materiel, ammunition, and weapons into Gaza. And Hamas has said, absolutely not. We're not going to permit that. That is the principle. There are lots of other sticking points, but they can all be resolved. But Israeli control of ingress and egress in Gaza, Israeli control of that border, that's the principal sticking point. They get around that, then you'll have a deal. Otherwise, no.
Okay, Colonel Jack Jacobs, thank you for that, as well as Monica Alba. Appreciate you both. So in 90 seconds, Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris spending her Labor Day trying to win over laborers. What she can expect when she arrives in Detroit later on this afternoon, that's after this.
Hello, I'm Dan Fields. Welcome to Jaguar Land Rover Bellevue, the newest member of the Fields Auto Group.
For over 50 years, Fields has been North America's premier family-owned and operated luxury auto group. Whether you're in the market for a luxury sedan, SUV, or electric vehicle, Jaguar Land Rover Bellevue has them all, in stock and ready for delivery.
And right now is a great time to get an offer like this.
Get 3.9 APR financing for up to 48 months on select 2024 Discovery Sport models at Land Rover Bellevue. Go to LandRoverBellevue.com.
It's the personal price plan theorem. If you bundle home and auto, that can equal an affordable price just for you.
Bundle and save with the personal price plan. All right. Yeah. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
App stores and smartphones have changed everything in our world. And just like an app store, Ethereum creates a place for others to build and launch new applications, which are owned by everyone on the blockchain. What if you could own a part of that ecosystem? CE. Registered access to Ethereum, available through your existing investment account.
Democracy is egalitarian, which means it's for everyone. But it also, I think, is a divinely inspired gift of our forefathers to show us that we can lead ourselves.
On this Labor Day, the Harris campaign is focusing on labor. Vice President Harris and Governor Walz are working to court union support as they crisscross the country today, meeting union members in 3 key swing states. Harris will kick off her day in Detroit before joining President Biden in Pittsburgh later, while Walz makes stops in St. Paul, Minnesota, and Milwaukee. Harris will have major support in Michigan today as she's joined by Governor Gretchen Whitmer and 2 of the most prominent labor leaders in the country, among others. NBC's Maura Baird is reporting for us from Detroit, and also joining us, Victoria DeFrancesco Soto, Dean of the Clinton School of Public Service, also an MSNBC